In this video, we're going to be putting a 1977 Ford Supercab body onto a 2015 Ford F350 crew cab frame. And I'm going to just walk through the steps quickly of how to get the body fit to the frame. That's the main purpose of this video. I'll do follow-on videos to go through some of the other details of this swap, but for now, let's focus on just fitting the body. So step one for me, I start with the beds. The reason I start with the bed is it's a fixed unit that just bolts right to the frame. There's no bushings that go underneath there, no mounts of any kind other than the bolts that run through the bed. So it's a very hard fixed unit right to the frame itself. And then you want to line your bed, or your cab up rather, to the bed once you've got that set on there. So doing the beds is super easy. First, let me just say this is an 8-foot bed on this truck. It may vary slightly with some of the other short beds, but for the long bed, it's very simple. The rearmost bolt holes just line up. So you set your bed on here, and these two bolt holes, or these two bolts, will drop right in on both sides, and that will put the arch of the wheel opening right where it should be over the rear tire. Now, the next two do not line up. I'll talk about that in just a moment. The next two after that, the front centers, if you will, they line right up, and you just drop your bolts in there. So now once you've got those 4 bolts set, kind of square your bed up on the frame a little bit, and then you'll come back to the second set forward bolt holes. So again, rearmost bolt holes. The next set up, it's just a matter of dropping the drill bit right through the bed down into the frame to drill a new hole. That's the original 2015's bolt hole. This is now for the 77 bed. So that's simple enough. Now, the frontmost bolts on these beds are inset. On the 77 beds, they're inset compared to the lineup of the rest of the bolts going. So the bolt, basically when it comes through the bed, half the bolt is hitting the frame and the other half out here is not. So what you do is just weld a tab onto the frame right here, and then you can drill a new hole where half the hole is in the original frame, half the hole is in your tab. That's the original 2015 hole out here. So that's all you need to do for the front bolt hole. So setting the bed is super simple. Now once you've got your bed set, that's when you can line up your cab, get your body lines lined up so that your cab is at the right height on the frame. So what I do next is I'll typically lower the cab down on there, get the wheel arch set the way I want to see it, the front fender over the front tire, and then from there figure out a couple of things. One, how much I think I need to take out of the frame. Now we do that mathematically as well. I took 18 inches out because the 2015 crew cab was 173 wheelbase. The 77 is a 155 inch wheelbase. And that math matched up to reality when I had the bed, or the cab rather, set where I want it, and then measured between it, the back of the cab and the front of the bed, and those two agreed. So for the frame, I then took 18 inches out, and what I did was your Z-cut, I came across, down, over, I had a 10-inch nice long weld horizontally, and then back out again down the bottom of the frame. So once the Z-cut was done, you bring the frame back together, you square up, you level up, you get everything correct, and then weld the Z-cut together, weld it on both sides of the frame, ground the outside of the frame flush, and then I had a gusset made. It's a piece of 1/4-inch steel, 24 inches long. It's bent on a brake at the bottom, so this is a nice bend on the bottom flange coming over, and then all the way up the web side of the frame. And then the top piece is a strip of 2-inch by 1/4 laid across the top. Clamp everything with many clamps. Clamp this guy tight to the side, clamp them tight to the bottom. Again, this is the bend. And then weld this up across the top. So now you have a super tight custom fit piece of C-channel. Then you come back and you drill all your holes. I did 6 across the top, 6 across the bottom, 12 holes all together. That gets me on both sides of the Z-cut all the way down. That's a 1/2-inch bolt, fine thread with a flanged head and a flanged nut on the other side. And then once all that's done, then once all the holes are drilled, you can take this piece of plate off. It's going to be super tight. It took pry bars and hammers to get it off. clean everything up, paint it all real good. It took hammers and blocks of wood to pound it back on there again. So that's what you want, as tight a fit as you can. I would have had them bend the top as well, but there's just no way. It'd be pure dumb luck if they could bend it to that level of tightness. You know, it's either going to be too tight where it wouldn't fit, or it'd be too loose and flopping around. So that's the reason I did it as a bend on the bottom and a weld across the top, so I could get a super custom tight fit piece of channel across there. So that's how I took care of shortening the frame. And then once you've got that done, now you can come back and do your cab mount perches. So what I did here, you bring the cab back down now and get the body lines lined up perfect with the bed. Again, the bed is a fixed item on that frame. It really, you could shim it up. Can't shim it down, you could shim it up, but you don't want to do that. You just want to bolt it tight to the frame like it should be. Bring the cab to it and get your body lines lined up perfectly. Now as you do that, these are the 2015 perches that are still being used here. So what I did was I cut them loose. This one, for the original 2015 body, this was up, it was actually above the frame about this height, which obviously you can see didn't work. So I cut this one completely loose. The front cab mount, or front perch for the cab mount, same thing. It was mounted, this up here was down over this hole down here. So I cut it off the frame. And then what you do is you bolt these to the bottom of the cab. You don't attach them to the frame yet. You just bolt them to the bottom of the cab with I'm using the original 2015's cab mounts. Make sure you put the bolts in there and compress this guy down, because what you don't want to do is have it uncompressed, bolted lightly to the bottom of the cab, because when it compresses, it'll compress probably about 3/8 of an inch. And what'll happen is, if you get all this set up and your body lines are perfect between the cab and the bed, when you finally do your final torque, suddenly your cab's going to sink 3/8 of an inch, and then your body lines will be off, and you'll be shimming your cab up. So make sure that you do tighten these down. So you bolt these tight to the bottom of the cab, bring the cab over, get it set down on the frame to be perfectly lined up with the body lines of the bed, and then figure out where you're going to attach them to the frame. So for the rear was super simple. You can see I cut it right across here when I cut it down off that height. These tabs that are welded to the frame were done at the factory, and all I had to do was just slightly hammer. This one was much more straighter. I just hammered it back and then hammered this one a little bit forward, and then they caught this perch like perfectly, and then I welded the perch across to the back of the frame right there. So that took care of the rear cab perches and mounts very simply. For the front, I put a little bit more work into it. They had to come out from the frame a little bit. After cutting them off the frame, you lose a little bit of metal in there, so now they're slightly shorter this direction. So I used a piece of plate, and again just made an L bracket out of some plate, welded the perches to the plate, and then I bolted the perches to the frame to hold them on there. So that took care of the front cab mount. So once that work was complete, now I've got the correct wheelbase. I've got the wheel arches perfect in the rear, because the bed just bolts right on. Got it sitting the way I want it at the front. The gap between the bed and the back of the cab is exactly how I want it. So now we move to the front for the radiator support. And what I did here was I took the old frame horns off the 77's frame. I first welded a bar, a piece of tube, 2-inch tubing from one side over to the other before cutting anything off the 77 frame. So this way I don't lose any integrity between this side to this side for two reasons. One, the bumper is going to go on there, so I want those two to stay perfectly aligned with each other the way they should be. And then of course the radiator support, the radiator bolts on there. That's the mounts for the radiator right there. So once I did that, welded that in, then I went ahead and cut probably 12 inches long off the front of the 77 frame coming back. And then once I had that, I brought it over to the 2015's frame and figured out how to best, French this thing in. You can see the weld coming down, so I made some cardboard templates to figure out how to do all that, and then just work that thing in there to be perfect. Now there's the 2015 frame. The frame of this 2015 came down much lower, way down here somewhere. So I cut it up higher, moved the sway bar up so it's not hanging down so low, and then I left the frame set up so that the original 2015 tow hooks could be put in here, and they will come out just right underneath the front bumper once the bumper is mounted on there. So that took care of the front of the truck for getting the radiator support bolted on there, as well as the front bumper now will just bolt right on there. So that was done using, again, once the cab was set and body lines were lined up perfect with the bed, then I came and figured out what elevation the radiator support needed to be, and that's how I figured out how to put the front of those front frame horns on there. Now, the truck, the 2015 truck, it has the 6.2 liter gas engine in it with automatic transmission. And it's a little bit easier to work with, a gas engine, than the diesel engines. I've done diesels as well. Diesels require a bit more firewall work. You've got the turbo, you've got downpipe, and it's just, it's a bigger monster in the back to work with. So on this one, it's a gas. I haven't done any performance or modifications to it other than I added a set of stainless steel headers on there with high flow cats, but still out a single exhaust pipe out to the rear. I think you saw the rear coming out. So I got it set up the way that it would be on the 77 truck or a mid-90s truck with a single exhaust coming out on the passenger side. I should say as well, the drive shaft was shortened. So the original front shaft, it's got a carrier bearing. It's a two-piece drive shaft under here. I did not shorten the front section of the drive shaft, and what I did was I moved the carrier bearing back. It had to go back 18 inches. So the carrier bearing was originally bolted in these holes on that cross member, and I just brought it back one cross member and made a new bracket. It's kind of hard to tell with all the black under there, but a new bracket to hang the carrier bearing. So the front drive shaft section up to the transmission stays untouched all the way into the carrier bearing. And then the rear drive shaft had 18 inches taken out of it off the carrier bearing going back to the rear axle. So again, coming back up to the front now with the engine I was talking, the gas engines are a little bit easier simply because they're not, have all the extra stuff on the back. So that brings us to the firewall modifications. So they're very simple on this one. I've done diesels and it requires a lot more firewall work. All I had to do was create two little pockets for the cylinder heads to kind of fit into. This is the driver's side here, and that hole, it's for the cable for the transmission shift going through. The original section in the center is all untouched, and then again recess it just a little bit on the passenger side over here for the cylinder head to be sitting back there. That covers about everything for swapping this over. I guess some other details. The anti-lock brake system, which is buried underneath a lot of the wires and stuff hanging out right now. I moved it for the 2015. Throughout the years, Ford mounted this anti-lock brake in a couple of different places, starting in '99 all the way up through current. On the 2015, it was mounted directly on top of the spring tower right here. This is one of the bolt holes for it. And to make it work, I wanted to keep the original inner fenders and everything of the 77, so I moved it back behind the spring tower and lowered it down. So this bolt that you see hanging out down here originally was what was bolted up in here. So just moved it back, made new bracket hanging off of the frame right there, coming up, and made all new brake lines coming off of it, and then picked up into the original brake lines. It was real simple to do. The way Ford has it set up is the front brake. Here's the brake lines down in here. The front brakes coming off of the anti-lock brake system come down to a junction point right here. You can see the connectors. And all the trucks are set up that way so that for whatever the frame length is going to be, the rear brake lines are different lengths set up on that. So in other words, coming off the anti-lock brake system, the lines always come and stop right here near the front of the frame. And then based on the chassis length, the brake lines from the rear axle coming up are going to be different for each configuration. And then, of course, the front brakes to the front wheels are always the same. That's the reason they kind of did the rear brake setup that way, because your two front brake lines are the same no matter what the cab or the chassis length is. And so the frame determines the brake lines coming up to that point. So I just kept with that and just made new brake lines coming off of the controller, coming down, going to the rear, the two rear brake lines, and then coming up. First one comes to the driver's side wheel here, and then for the passenger side, rather than bend it all the way over to the other wheel over there, I just did a connector here as well. So just cut the original 2015 brake line, flared it right here, and just made a connector to go up to the anti-lock brake controller. There's a lot of other things to talk about with this, but what I wanted to cover in this video was just fitting the body onto the frame. I think that pretty well covers everything. There's a lot of other details to talk about, but I'll do those in future videos. So that's it for now, and hopefully you stay tuned in.